Well, we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can keep on time. And yeah, I'm really excited about tonight's talk. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colleen Curlin. I lead the programming at the Battery. You've probably seen my face on one of these rectangles over the past year. But I'm really excited about tonight's talk, The Lost Art of Connecting. Obviously, given the past year, we are at a time where we're more physically distant than ever. And so it's really crucial for us to reverse these growing trends of disconnection and forge meaningful connections and relationships in our personal and professional lives. And so tonight I am excited to be joined by author and communication expert Susan McPherson, as well as Kara Goldin, founder and CEO of Hint Water. Together, we're going to explore how we can create these meaningful connections based on intention, shared interest, and helping others. So just to share a little bit more about our speakers tonight, Susan McPherson is a serial connector, seasoned communicator, and founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, a communication consultancy focused on the intersection of brands and social impact. Susan has 25 years of experience in marketing, public relations, and contributing to the Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Forbes. Her book, The Lost Art of Connecting, The Gather, Ask, Do Method for Building Meaningful Business Relationships is out today. Congratulations. We're going to drop a link in the chat for you all to explore and purchase if you're interested. And joining Susan tonight is Kara Goldin, the founder and CEO of Hint Water. She has received numerous accolades, including being named EY Entrepreneur of the Year, Fast Company's Most Creative People in Business, and Fortune's Most Powerful Women Entrepreneurs. The Huffington Post listed her as one of 6 disruptors in business alongside Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. Kara's first book, Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, was released in October of 2020 and is now a Wall Street Journal and an Amazon bestseller. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. You'll notice that you're all on mute. We will do a Q&A through the chat feature or towards the end of the hour, so start thinking of your questions and feel free to drop them in. And we are recording tonight's session and we'll share a link in a follow-up email later this week. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Kara.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to introduce everyone to my friend and just amazing, inspirational author. Yay, Susan. Very, very excited. We're super excited to be here to talk a little bit more about your book. And I have your book, by the way, right here. And I have to say, I just gobbled up every single word of this because I think it is so necessary to really hear your messages. And I think so many people are asking these questions right now, particularly coming out of this last year. So I want to start by really just kind of hearing from you. How did you decide to write this book?
Well, first of all, thank you, Kara. It is an honor and privilege to actually be in your orbit and be in your company and be asked questions by you. And I have to say, I'm fangirling, even though you're a dear friend. And I also want to thank the Battery. And I have to say, I really wish I was in San Francisco right now. Not that I don't love where I live, which is Brooklyn, but Lord knows how wonderful San Francisco is. So interestingly enough, the book began 4 years ago, long before the pandemic. And it grew from almost, I don't want to say disgust, but almost like a distaste for what I saw, that people were basically determining their success of networking and connecting by the number of clicks, the number of likes, the number of followers, as opposed to what really mattered: the meaningful, deep relationships, the people that show up, the people that actually come when you need them and when you don't need them. Mm-hmm. I did the proposal. We all know that takes a long time. And I started to write in February of 2020. And then guess what happened in March? All we had were the clicks and the likes and the technology. So there goes my whole thesis, right? And over this past year, while writing this, I interviewed 35 amazing leaders who have used building meaningful connections as a way to advance their careers, as to make their lives more meaningful. And it did give me a kind of hope in humanity. And now in the last month, as I was getting ready for launch day, I kept bursting into tears because I kept thinking, first of all, how ridiculous it is to be launching a book about connection during the most isolating time in almost all of our lives. And full confession, I have been alone, me, myself, and I, we're a happy threesome, since last March. I am. I don't have children. I don't have parents, and I don't have a partner. So, as you can probably tell, even in this short intro, I'm definitely not an introvert. But it was through writing this book that it did give me this renewed sense. And probably most importantly, what I realized in the last few weeks is there's a glimmer of hope. We are now on the cusp of actually being able to kind of rejoin some sense of normalcy. What that normalcy will be, I'm not a prognosticator, I can't tell you. But it dawned on me that now we have a chance to leverage this technology that we have gotten so good at, but also build the communities and surround ourselves with the communities that are built with humanity and built in a way that don't look just like us and that are inclusive and diverse. So that gives you a little bit of framing for the lead up to the book and where we are today.
No, I love that. So the book again is called The Lost Art of Connecting. And I think that the thing that really struck me the most, Susan, was I've always viewed you as this amazing communicator and also networker, but it's more than the networking. And it is really gaining those deeper relationships. Even when I've said to people, like you've offered to introduce me to people, you actually know about 30 layers deep of those people. And I mean that sincerely, because I think that to your point about social media, there's all kinds of likes, you have connections all over the place, but how well do you know these people? And I think that that's something that we all worry about later on in life, frankly, that we don't necessarily have these connections. So how would you describe the difference between networking and connecting? I mean, what are those two things, and in your mind, and how do we get better at connecting?
Well, first of all, I don't think networking is bad. Okay, we all have to do it, whether we're extroverts,
Great.
introverts, and we will eventually go back to those rubber chicken dinners, and the pigs in the blanket and all that kind of stuff. But what I am talking about in the book is this notion of, instead of the typical networking mindset of what can I get, who can I meet, how many cards can I get, it's more about a much smaller number and actually going deep.
Mhm.
What Kara just shared was this 30 layers deep, comes from a specific portion of the methodology I lay out in my book, which is called Gather, Ask, Do. And I don't want to jump way ahead, but I will tell you the ask component is not asking for what you want or need, which is very important, but it's learning to ask the right questions of others that give you those 30 layers deep. So that then when you go and introduce them to someone else or support them in whatever endeavor that they particularly are in need of, you actually have the answers, or at least some of the answers. So, in terms of networking and building deep, meaningful relationships, networking is terrifying for people who are introverts. I fervently believe that the methodology I put forth is actually a bit more tolerable to people who might be a bit shy, because it's not a numbers game. And I often say, when you go into a room, whether it's a Zoom room or a Microsoft Teams room or a room, a real room, a like dinner table room, um, you can actually instead walk in with three, I call them like the three missives, where you have the intent to meet three people, learn three things, and share three things. Just that. And at the end of the night, you will walk away with something much deeper than just walking and sharing cards going back and forth. So I think that's an example of how I would decipher between the two.
Did you always think about it as gather, ask, do? Or, I mean, did you how did that, because it's so true, right? When you think about it, you're like, of course, that's the way to think about it. But I remember reading about it in the book, and I've known you for a while, and I've never heard you, joke about it, right? Like but it really is when I read about it in the book, it's really clear that that is what's necessary. I think to your point, you don't have to be this really outspoken, you know, it's almost just having those three things in your head to talk to people about is what's needed, and try it more than anything.
And this, what an amazing opportunity in our lives right now, before we kind of get back out, to actually do. And I'll run through it, so people have an understanding. Um, and this is also, gather as do is not something you would do once or twice, but it's something you have in your back pocket that you do,
Mhm.
fairly often in your life, when, especially whenever you're going through a change, like a new job, a new board position, you moving to a new city. And essentially, gather is doing that inner reflection to really, one, find out what is the community you want to build around you, and two, who is inside, and what is the special, what I call your chief differentiating factor, what sets you apart. And this is really important both for young people or insecure people, because and I'm one of them, believe me. I'm tiny, I'm not even 5 foot with heels on, so when I walk in a room nobody sees me, and I'm like, hey, I'm here. So um, to me it was a lot of soul searching to realize, what is my superpower, what are the secret sauces that I have. And once you determine that, you then can move to the ask phase. And again, the ask is not about asking for things for yourself, although I do get into that because there are ways you can successfully ask. But more importantly is, when you're in that room, whether it's the proverbial Zoom room or a human, I'm just going to call it a human room. I don't know, what do we call it anymore? But asking those questions instead of, what did you have for lunch today? Or how is the weather in Cleveland? Think about questions that are going to really elicit
Mhm.
responses that are going to tell you something about that person. Like, at the end of this pandemic, where in the world could you go if you could go anywhere, and why? Or how are you doing really now? I mean, we know this pandemic has been tough on everyone. How have you been doing? And what can I be doing in my capacity to be of help? And lastly, when you get to the next phase, which is do, it's kind of like, well, duh, because the person's just told you.
Yeah.
But in reality, the notion is when you listen to what is going on in people's lives, you have the power and capacity to be of help, to be of service. And you know what? It's okay if you can't be at that moment in time, but you may know somebody who can be. So then you can refer them. And it's a cyclical thing. And I know a lot of people are thinking, Susan, how do you help people all the time? It's exhausting, da da da. But I can honestly say, after 30 years of practicing in this, the more people you help, the more help you give yourself, because then there's this army of people that are there, that show up, that are dependable and reliable, and you become someone who is dependable and reliable. There's no better compliment than to be someone who shows up and is trustworthy, at least in my view. All right, that was a long answer. Apologies.
No, I love it. I'm thinking as you're talking about this, because I don't think that this is just applicable to people who are, you know, in the workforce, right? I think that this is also totally applicable for people who are just getting out of college, that are trying to figure out, what the heck do I want to do? How am I going to find a job in, in a Zoom world? And it's happening. And I've been speaking on college campuses for the last few months, and these are some of the questions that I'm getting asked. So I think that this is really totally applicable to anybody, right? It's really trying to figure out, what am I going to do? It's not just about meeting the right people. It's actually about asking those questions and then ultimately going out and doing. So
Well, also doing the soul searching to figure out what you have to offer. And I can't tell you how many young people have said to me, oh, I'm only 22. What can I offer somebody who's 50? And you know what I say? TikTok.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, I'm being facetious, but the point is there's a lot of things that 20 somethings can offer 50 somethings. Believe me. I mean, just help with setting up my iPhone, like, foolish things, but a lot of technological things that perhaps as we get older, we're not as good at. And I certainly don't want to, I'm sure there's plenty of people over 50 that are very technical. But I think that is part of that notion that everyone has a secret sauce. Everyone has a chief differentiating factor.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think there's something else that comes to mind for me when you talk about that. We always think that these very successful and people that have their act together or whatever, that they actually don't want to help, right? We think that they're, they've got it together. I'm falling apart. I'm still trying to figure stuff out. I'm a junior level person. And what I found over the years is that those are actually the people that do want to help, but they don't get asked. And so that is the piece that I got out of reading this section in your book too, that if you don't ask, then you're not going to get any answers. But those are the people that don't get asked very often. So I think it's just sort of another piece that really kind of cropped into my brain when I was reading that as well. So you had me thinking a lot on that whole chapter for sure. So how do you think the relationships are different through a Zoom world then, and in terms of networking, and how does it change?
Sure. Well, I can talk to my own experience. I run a company. We're a small business. I have 12 employees, some of which I've never met. And over this past year, I mean, again, there would be times, for instance, that I would come to our Zoom meetings and I'd be holding back tears. And there was part of me like, you're the boss, you're not supposed to do this. But I, this pandemic has been the great equalizer. I mean, obviously, I would never suggest that I had it anywhere as difficult as people who've lost loved ones, people who lost livelihoods and jobs. But it has been hard for me to be all alone for 12 months, right? So running a company, trying to show up every day. But it finally dawned on me, not finally, but a few months in, it's like, you know what? I'm just going to be me. And I am going to expose when I am feeling uncomfortable. And just by doing that, that helped my employees feel free to also be vulnerable. And it really kept the team together, and it kept the team actually almost, I don't want to say working harder, but working better. So I have to say that, nothing is compared to being in person, right? And if anything, this past year, we have learned just the vital importance of how meaningful it is to be with loved ones and even colleagues that sometimes would drive us crazy because maybe they were eating smelly food or something, or, just talking in your ear when you're trying to get work done. But now you're like, oh my God, I miss that person. But I think there's some ways, for instance, with Zoom, for instance, the chat function is an incredible tool. When we used to be in meeting after meeting all day, you couldn't be chatting with people during the meeting. And I'm certainly not suggesting you don't pay reverence to whoever is running the meeting or pay attention, but can be very effective if you are chatting with someone during the meeting and say, you know what, I really want to catch up with you. I really want to find out how you're doing. Let's set a time. You could never do that in a real meeting. So I think that there are some things that we are actually getting better at in terms of through this kind of technology. And I also do think, and studies have shown this past year, that business on a whole has become more empathetic, more compassionate. And shame on the CEOs who have not held space for people, who have not made it a more open and welcoming environment for people who are having challenges. I run a corporate responsibility social impact firm, so I'm probably a little harsher on that than many, but I think we know for sure that the companies that are more social impact focused, more purpose driven, and actually more diversity aligned, and actually not just saying it, but doing it, are the ones that are going to be successful. So I think taking all of those imprints or those values to the online world are just as important as in the real world.
I think it's so true. So I loved in the book, you talked about going from FOMO to JOMO. So can you enlighten us on this chapter of your life?
Well, I will tell you, the gather again is very. I mean, I want to make sure people who read this book are know that introverts are welcome, and during the gather focus is excuse me, during the gather portion is when you're thinking about the community you want to build. And certainly young people or shy people sometimes, or not sometimes, but often don't get invited to those events. And I have to tell you, this goes back to the high school girl that got left out of parties and would come home crying, right? And fast forward to the, aughts, when we got to see the parties we weren't invited to on, whatever social channel. And I didn't wait till the 2000s to do this, but I found that by being the convener, and you don't have to invite 50 people, 3 people, and then ask each of those people to bring people. By way of doing that, you're what I call deploying something called JOMO, which is not the joy of missing out, which is what we tend to think of, the opposite of FOMO, but it's actually the joy of meeting others. Because what has sparked so much joy in my life is meeting people so I can learn new things and then meet people through them and then introduce them all. So I hope that is clear. But I just found that that was a great tool when you are feeling like either one, you're not invited to the proverbial business event that you need to be at for your business. Make your own, host your own, or on a personal life, a personal situation. If you're not invited to that event, host your own, gather your own, and it can be a walk. It can be a walk of 4 people.
It's so true. So where do you feel like you connect most with people? Is there any specific, I mean, do you feel like it's at a dinner or a walk, or where do you think, if like, where is your favorite connection place?
I think over puppies.
I'm sure. So Susan's dog Phoebe is just the cutest little puppy. So it's so true though.
But I will tell you, I mean, and please, I'm going to come across somewhat neurotic, but since September, which is when I started tracking, I've walked more than 1,500 miles. Now, there is a reason. Of course, it's healthy, it's good for you, but I have a dog who's very similar to Norm on Cheers. So, for those of you who are of age, remember Norm. So she goes up and introduces herself to everyone and everyone. So during the pandemic, that has been a way for me to actually not feel lonely. Okay, because inevitably my dog is licking them and I have to have a conversation. So I have to say over that, but I honestly, Kara, it's really over all the like the volunteer and board service work that I do on the when I'm not working. And one of the key messages throughout the book is leading with how can I help? And when people say to me, Susan, how do I meet people that are outside my bubble? How do I meet people that don't look like me? One of the most effective ways is start in some sort of service for a local organization that needs help. And when I hear somebody says, well, I have nothing to offer because I'm not wealthy, you have skills. You have a social media network, or maybe you're building one. But just by doing that, you're going to expand your knowledge. And importantly, you're going to expand your community so that you can better understand the world of others.
Yeah. And whenever you're helping too, right? Like, I think that that's another thing, that it's not just about making those networking, adding another person to the list of people that you end up having dialogue and meaning to why what you're doing is really important and finding that connection. So I found that as well. And I really, I totally agree with you that showing up at a nonprofit or anything that is something that you're passionate and you care about, you end up finding other people that are really passionate about that
Getting
too.
out to vote, civil service. I mean, there's we obviously have no shortage of issues that need our help and support. And so, to me, also for young people who, are just starting out, it is a tremendous way to meet people, meet influencers, meet people that are going to actually help develop your business acumen, your personal acumen. So that is a wonderful way.
It's interesting. I think I was sharing this in this list that we're both a part of the other day, that my father passed away from Alzheimer's about 10 years ago. And I was invited by Maria Shriver to this amazing initiative that she has around the women's Alzheimer's movement. And I went to this event because I was passionate about it. But I ended up staying for the entire day because I met a lot of other people while I was there networking, not really intentionally, but all of a sudden making all these connections with people about something that we were both really passionate about.
Yeah, and that
And
was
I think
meaningful
it
to you.
was, and I, from that meeting, we found these connections. And I don't think anybody knew that they were, it wasn't like a sit down, we want these people to meet. It was because we all cared about the same initiative. And so I really do believe, like, find one or two things that you're really passionate about and then just show up and see what will happen.
Exactly. And I just have to tell you something really funny because it's a funny Susan story. I actually met Maria Shriver when I was 5 years old. She, I'm sure, does not remember, but when I was a child, we were living in Romania. This was 1970. My late father landed a Fulbright scholarship, and he was an expert in Eastern European Romanian history. Maria's father was the ambassador to Paris, or to France, excuse me. And they flew my family from Bucharest to Paris to meet with the ambassador, Sergeant Shriver, at the time. And I still remember it because my mother, my late mother, basically told my siblings, my brother, my sister, and me, that we were not to say a word. We were just to sit like this, when we went to this mansion. And I remember walking in, and all the Shriver kids, there's like 20 of them. No, I'm kidding. There's, I think, 6. But they were running around and they had tricycles out. And there was, and of course, we were like, and when you're that age, all you want to do is play with the other kids' toys, right? But I still, to this day, anytime somebody mentions Marie Shriver, I'm like, I know
Right.
someday I'm gonna
Because
have
you have the connections and you have that story, and right. And I think that that's what's so fun about it, that it's not just about meeting, you actually knew something about the whole situation. I absolutely love it. So the other point that you make in the book, which I think is such a great one, but it's very hard often for people to do, is to really be a good listener. And how do you change that about yourself if you know you're not a good listener, right? You're that person who walks into a room and wants to, tell everybody what you know. How do you think what would you say?
Well, first of all, the framing I've always used is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we should go with the missive of listening twice as much as we speak. Although obviously I break that rule on occasion. But I honestly, in this past year, listening has become even more important because it used to be we were distracted when we'd be talking to people because we'd be looking around the room or we'd be thinking about our next glass of wine. But now we have the pings and the dings and the Twitter and the da 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 all happening while we're in these meetings, right? So it is, the onus is on us to be even better. And I will say, listening to Dr. Julian Treasure's multiple TED Talks about the art of listening really, really helped. And I want to just tie it back. You can't do the ask component in my book if you're going to ask people questions and then tune out when they answer. Because guess what? Then you're never going to get to be able to do the do. So I am a slave to taking notes when I talk to people. I also have absolutely no problem saying, "Can you repeat that?" And sometimes we're shy to do that because we feel like they might have not, that we may come across as we're not listening. But actually, it's showing you are listening and you are paying attention. And it's the ultimate commitment that you are listening when you ask someone to repeat it and then go so far as to repeat it back to them. And then the other thing I really think is important to do, and I know this is a time commitment, but if you have a couple of meaningful chats, whether online or in that, rubber chicken dinner, jot it down. And when you get home that night or when you shut your computer down, well, before you shut your computer down, jot back the note to that person and let them know that you heard them, that you saw them, and that you appreciated it. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything more than that, but just that action goes such a long way in making you a very human person, if that makes sense, but also becoming that person that people can rely on and depend on. That is the first kind of step in proving that.
as the CEO of a company too, what I found was that when I initially read your book, I felt like it was really speaking to me and about living my life. But as I started to look at it towards my employees and towards my 4 Gen Zers too, there were
Yeah.
so many aspects about it that I really thought it was totally applicable. I mean, when you're you're living in a work environment and you're trying to figure out community and who do you gel with and how are you going to find out, and particularly in a world where you're not sitting at the desk next to them, you're on Zoom. But I think actually calling, having a call, right, initiating something, saying, hey, I just don't know you very well, would you mind having a 30-minute call with me? And we started that in our organization before your book, full admission. But it was really pick out somebody that you don't know
Right.
in the company.
I love that.
And yeah, and I mean, it's been really fun for people because we find that we get in these silos where there's the direct to consumer team and the supply chain team, and they just are not really getting to know each other, and they don't see each other in the hallways clearly. And it's I mean, I think your book is so great for teams like that to really think about, how do we get these connections going? How do we keep these connections going? And particularly when people are coming in and they don't know anybody because they've been hired during this crazy year. I think it's so, so important. So I don't think this is not just a book for how to make yourself better or how to give it to, a shy friend of yours or your sister or whatever. It really, I mean, I mean this sincerely. I think it has a lot of ways, a lot of different rivers that stem off of it, whether it's for, college environments or whether it's for, nonprofits that are trying to figure out how to work better together, or teams, and how do we figure out how to keep building community, camaraderie, all of that. So I mean that. I think that it really has a lot of legs in that direction. So
First of all, that you are a CEO. You run a very successful consumer brand, Hint Water, and if any of you don't drink Hint, highly recommended, and it's healthy. And Kara has built that with her blood, sweat, and tears.
Blackberry Hint right there.
There you go, and you can see how healthy she is from drinking. But I will say, this is really important. Whether you buy my book or not, but some of the research I learned, which I thought was such a testament to why building meaningful relationships is important. It actually makes us live longer. Okay.
Mhm.
I don't really think of, I mean, there's not a whole lot better reason to do something, but also from a business productivity standpoint, study after study shows that teams that are better connected actually are more productive and your employees are happier. And I think
Right.
what you just so graciously stated is the case. And there's a lot of instances and ideas in the book that tells you. Um, and this past year, having employees that have never met, I had to very intentionally put together, the various, and we, excuse me, various like quote unquote happy hours. But after 2 months, it was like we needed to come up with new and interesting ways. And we have a Monday meeting every week, and we always start it with going around the room with some, as typically an icebreaker. But the icebreakers are things like, what was your favorite food as a child?
Mhm.
And each person goes around and says that. And just that kind of question provokes so much fodder for interesting, dynamics. And you learn so much about someone's heritage, their culture, their likes, their passions in that one little question. And it does promote because then, people are like, oh my God, I want to try that. And then everybody's like hungry and, anyhow.
I absolutely love it. So where do people get your book?
Well, that's a very good question. And I say wherever you like to buy books. Okay, it's available anywhere and everywhere. Um, Obviously, the big beast, Amazon, it's available, but also Barnes and Noble and your local bookshop. So I would be honored if you went ahead and made a purchase. And there's going to be an audiobook coming out in June, so you can hear my voice again if you want. But right now, you can get the hardcover in Kindle. And oh my God, it came out today.
Yay! Very, very excited. So, well, it's a great book, and I'm really and I really do think that it's rare that a book for me actually is not business or self-improvement or whatever. And I feel like yours just kind of weaved in there. So I really think that it's one that, especially as we're starting to look at team building and I really think that I see workshops in the horizon on this whole on so much of what you are talking about in here. So I love it.
Well, should we open it up to questions? Or I would
I
imagine.
think so. I would love it if people have some questions, and I think Colleen was
Or
gonna.
comments too. I mean, I'd love people's ideas. Not that I'm saying I'm doing book number 2. I'll let Kara do that.
Yeah, if you have any questions for Susan, please drop them in the chat and we can read them from there. Thank you all both for such a great conversation. And Susan, thank you for this book. I think I echo Kara in that this is one of those beautiful intersections of professional and personal.
Mhm.
But this
That
past year's taught me one thing in particular, that those are kind of blurred now. We have
yes.
this perspective into people's lives because we are working from home and all of that, and so being able to find a balance and sort of blend those things together is really important for teams and working in collaborative, even cross functionally in an organization. So it's a really beautiful book on how to do that, particularly.
Thank you. And I often joke that there isn't a work Susan and a home Susan, and you're actually seeing the home Susan. So this is me. But it got exhausting trying to be two people, and it's almost it's something I understand in my younger professional years. It was a terrifying thought, right? To be the Susan that burst into tears, and obviously in the coming of age in the 90s professionally, if you actually cried in the workplace, you were doomed. And I do believe we are living in a very different world now. I'm not suggesting you share all your horror stories with your colleagues, but I think bringing your true self, and I know that is a very contrite statement, and I understand that many people don't feel safe doing that. But when you can and where you can, um, I would try. I also think the owners again is on management to make people feel comfortable.
Well said. Yeah, we have a question from Catherine. If possible, can you share an example of implementing your strategy for building teams?
Well, I have this past year. And interestingly enough, my team, and it's on YouTube now, they made a video for me called The Found Art of Connecting. And they talked about over this past year all the ways I helped integrate this team of 12 that are from all. I have one employee in Bulgaria. And they couldn't actually meet. So all the different ways. So I'm happy if Colleen, you want to collect that person's email, I'm happy to send that video, and it will be like soup to nuts, and it's 3 minutes, and actually you will love it. And there's lots of dogs in the video.
It's so good.
Yeah, we'll get that video and we'll share it along with the book link as well.
I love it. It's so good.
I'm not seeing questions come in, so maybe I'll ask one of my own. Susan, what's next? What are you hoping for people to take away from this? Kara mentioned workshops, but um, I feel like this content is ripe for um, more implementation in different corporate structures. So, what's next for you?
Well, great question. And I actually did a big talk today at Bloomberg for the company, 400 employees, and the comments back were, this is what people want. People really want to talk about how to connect, and also not wait until we're out in the real world. And my hope would be people would actually start thinking about what is that community they want to build, and also just ask yourself, what is to you a meaningful connection? Really think about that. and start being intentional on how you build meaningful relationships, connections. Um, I would say what's next for me. I've got a slew of book talks coming up, obviously. Um, and I'm really excited for us to actually be out and about. And I meant that when I said like squeezing puppies. I'm not squeezing them hard, but I am blessed living in Brooklyn where it's like puppy on parade. So I'm really excited to see lots more puppies.
You and I share a love for dogs, that's for sure. Um, Here's a question from Alyssa. I hope
Oh,
I'm saying
hi,
that right.
Alyssa. Thank you for coming.
She says, I think some of us are careful about being 100% free, always connecting people as though it might reflect badly on us if two people you introduce have a negative interaction with one another. Has that ever happened to you?
I have to say it has. And it I think initially I felt terrible. Like it was all, oh my God, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have. I will caveat that I always ask permission before I introduce people, unless it is somebody that is such a dear friend, like, basically grown up with. Um, but I will say that that is when, and this is something that it's taken my 50s to be able to actually swallow and be okay with, that you can't control. You just have to sometimes let it go. And a quick apology, a quick kind of, all right, I'm sorry it didn't work out, and then move on is the best advice possible.
It's sort of like dating, right? You can never put, right? You think these people will be, I mean, it's so true, right? And it's just, it really is the case. All you can do is put people
Yep. Well, and
together.
funny that you say that because I've been single for 6 years. So I have experienced that.
Yes, it's so true.
Yep.
And I think you just have to go out there. But it's interesting. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly around millennials. So millennials are 70% of the workforce today, and I think that I am not a millennial. I am a Gen Xer, and so something that I've thought a lot about as a leader is that the millennial generation has really brought a lot of things into the workforce, including community, mental health awareness, lots of, really important things that are going on. But I do believe that this whole concept of getting deeper relationships and community, particularly during a time when the last year has been incredibly stressful on everyone, but especially millennials who really do need these connections. And so I think as a leader too, it's something that, I really think is something that is needed, but yet I'm not sure that people have really thought that much about it. But I think that the more connections you make, and not just likes, but also what you know about people, what do you guys have in common? Maybe you don't even have that in common, but you're interested in
Sure.
it. And I think that creating these dialogues is just it creates happiness, right? It's just it falls into lifelong learning and just exposing yourself to new ideas and finding, of course, the commonality, but so much more. So, but it does take some courage,
Yep.
right? To put yourself out there and have some thick skin a little bit to say people aren't always going to understand you. And
Well, and also I think leading a life of curiosity
mhm.
and looking behind beyond your navel. I mean, I just inherently have always been curious. I'm always curious about anything that's different from what I know. Okay. And that has led me to very much, this ask component because I love to learn. I love to constantly be learning. And, God save me when the day I'm not interested in learning because life will get very, very dull. So I think that that should be a grounding mechanism as we go through this. And if we think, oh, this is a slog, it's actually not because everyone you meet is not only a door opener to something else, to someone else, to something new, but it's also in a way to learn something new about yourself, which is
I
actually
so agree.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely love that.
I completely agree. Yeah, I've often been I often try to remind myself to approach things with the curiosity as opposed to judgment, and that they are inherently opposite of one another. And so to be curious helps us eliminate that judgment of ourselves and other people of how things should be in a situation. So we have a question from someone that says, I love the notion of an icebreaker ritual for deepening connections. Do you have a few other examples you can share?
Or
Um,
yeah,
obviously, the book might have some more, but
yes, the book does. Not suggesting you buy the book, but just putting it out there. I love that question about where in the world do you want to go? Because you really can learn a lot about people, whether they like outdoor travel, whether they're a cruise person, whether they're, a city, they love to go to the arts. And a year ago, I hosted, well, probably more than a year ago now, probably back in 2019. I love to host gatherings. And obviously, this past year, they've all had to been virtual. But I hosted a book launch for a woman named Pavia Rosati, who has a travel company called Fathom Away. And she had this wonderful book out about, not being a tourist when you travel. And there's something I do at every single one of my gatherings, and that is have everyone go around the room. And it isn't like, hi, I'm Susan, I'm from Brooklyn, or hi, I'm Susan, I run a company. It's, hi, I'm Susan, and something unique about me. So at this particular venue, and this was long before the pandemic, but I asked everyone to say, where is their next trip? And if they don't have a trip planned, where do they want to go? And I took notes. So when 40 people stated where they wanted, and I followed up in an email connecting everyone afterwards, what then ensued is people who had been to, one person said, I want to go to Alaska. And then somebody else was like, I've been to Alaska. I can suggest da 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 da. And you got to stay at this hotel. And it was this magical thing to watch. And it was as simple as saying, where do you want to go on the planet? So think how powerful that kind of question could be right now, right? Then we're starting to plan. We know that in several months, when the world is vaccinated, that we can step out gingerly. I'm not anticipating, Times Square 1945, but we will be able to travel again. So hopefully that answered your question. But there's lots more in the book.
I love it.
we have one from Adrian. Satya Nadella's book, Hit Refresh, did a great job of tapping into the power of relationships and EQ. Curious if you've read it, if you have any comments. And it's been 26 years since Daniel Goldman came out with his breaking book about the importance of EQ. Do you have any thoughts on these relationships and EQ? And if any other books in the same vein that you might recommend?
Well, this is terrible because in the last year writing a book, I have not read any books. I've done a ton of research. So other than Kara's book Undaunted, shame on me, of course. But it would be, I would love to come back to you with some of the things that I have read, because right now, just on the spot, I'm like, my brain is just like, oh no, I can't. It's already almost 10 o'clock here. But I will say that I want to quote one illustrious, famous woman who was quite an inspiration for my book, and her name is Lois Weisberg. And she was, for lack of better terms, almost like the Grand Doyenne of Chicago. In the 60s and 70s, she basically would curate communities and introduce people. And she became famous because Malcolm Gladwell wrote about her in a famous 1999 piece about connections in the New Yorker. So I would highly recommend you Google Lois Weisberg and get a sense of how she did it, because this was obviously before technology existed. So just a good answer. And I will check out Satya's book, Hit Refresh. I'm just so impressed with the culture he has put into place at Microsoft. And full transparency, I lived in Seattle for years, so I was very familiar with the earlier cultures that Microsoft, and again, not bad, but nothing like it is today.
Thanks, Susan. I'm going to check out Lois Weisberg.
Lois, yes.
Lois, thank you. Well, then let's, I know it's late where you are, Susan, but I thought we could wrap things up for a question to both of you. Is there one piece of advice or one thing that you'd like everyone to leave with tonight? And maybe Kara, I'll start with you, and then Susan, you can answer last.
I think more than anything, sometimes things seem so hard. I know people who feel like they can't go to that deeper level with people, and they, maybe they don't have EQ, maybe they time themselves out before they actually go and try. And I think that being purposeful and really just committing, and despite maybe some fears that you might have, that it just really is important to do. And again, I can't emphasize enough that, having stronger relationships and more communication with people, I think is really, it's a source of happiness. And I feel really strongly about that. And you don't get there just by not going out and putting yourself out there at times.
Here to that. And, I was fortunate enough to meet Kara through an online community 10 years ago. And, not only is she a dear friend, but I'm an investor in her company. And I asked her to, the relationship goes very, very deep. I know her kids, I know her husband. We live, I don't know how far San Francisco and New York is. I should know. I would say one thing, well, two things. One, yesterday when I was out on one of my long walks, I saw a beautiful tapestry in Brooklyn, and all it said was "More kindness, please." And I think the world would be a lot better if we constantly had that mantra. And I realize sometimes it's hard to be kind, but that, and then reframe your life and lead with, "How can I be of help?"
Mm-hmm.
That's a mantra that you can carry with you every day. And there are going to be days that sometimes, of course, you need something and you need help, and that's fine too. But if you center yourself around leading with, "How can I help?" uh, the world will help you.
I love that. That's great.
Very beautiful. That's a wonderful sentiment to leave on. Thank you both for such a wonderful conversation. Susan, congratulations on the book. We'll drop another link in the chat just now. It takes you to a page where you can buy it from the bookseller of your choice, and we'll send a recording to everybody afterwards. But thank you both again for such a great conversation, and good luck and have a great rest of the week.